Ethan had been standing at the edge of the highway for nearly 40 minutes. The sun had already dropped behind the mountains, leaving only a dull orange glow fading into darkness. The road was quiet, one of those long rural highways where cars passed maybe once every 10 minutes. His phone had died an hour earlier, and the last town he'd passed through was still at least 15 miles behind him. He'd been hiking alone all afternoon on a trail that cut through a state forest. Everything had gone fine until he took a wrong fork somewhere near the end of the trail. By the time he realized he'd come out at the wrong road, it was already getting dark. Normally, that wouldn't have been a big deal. But his car was parked miles away at a different trailhead, and there was no signal anywhere. So eventually, he did the one thing people are always told not to do. He stuck out his thumb. The first few cars drove right past him without slowing down. One truck honked as it passed. Another driver briefly slowed before speeding up again. Then, finally, a dark SUV slowed beside him. The passenger window rolled down, and a man leaned slightly toward the opening. He looked to be somewhere in his mid-40s. Short hair, clean-shaven, glasses. Nothing about him immediately felt threatening. "Need a ride?" the man asked. Ethan hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, my car's parked over at Pine Ridge Trailhead." The man smiled lightly. "That's about 20 minutes up the road. Hop in." Ethan opened the passenger door and climbed inside. The interior smelled faintly like pine air freshener and something else he couldn't quite place. The man pulled back onto the road. For the first few minutes, the ride felt completely normal. They exchanged small talk. The driver said his name was Carl and that he lived in the town about an hour away. He claimed he was just passing through after visiting family. Ethan explained how he'd gotten turned around on the trail. Carl laughed a little. "Those forest trails will do that to you. People underestimate how easy it is to get lost out here." The headlights carved through the darkness ahead of them as the SUV moved steadily along the highway. But after about 10 minutes, something started to feel off. Ethan had been watching the road signs carefully, waiting to see one for Pine Ridge Trailhead. They passed the first intersection, then the second, and then Carl slowed down and turned onto a much smaller road. It was narrow and barely paved, surrounded by dense trees that seemed to swallow the light from the headlights. Ethan frowned slightly. "I think the trailhead's still up the main road," he said. Carl didn't look over. "Shortcut." The word came out casually, but something about the way he said it made Ethan uneasy. The road quickly became rougher. Branches scraped lightly against the sides of the SUV as the forest closed in around them. Ethan looked out the window. There were no houses, no lights, no signs, just trees. "How far is this shortcut?" he asked. Carl shrugged. "Not far." They kept driving. Another few minutes passed, then 5, then 10. Ethan's stomach began to tighten. The road had turned into little more than a dirt path now, winding deeper and deeper into the forest. The headlights occasionally illuminated broken branches, fallen logs, and thick brush creeping in from both sides. Ethan glanced at the dashboard clock. They had been off the highway for almost 15 minutes. "Hey," he said slowly, "are you sure this connects back to the main road?" Carl didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached forward and adjusted something on the dashboard. The interior lights dimmed slightly. Then he finally spoke. "Yeah," he said, but his tone had changed. It was flatter now, quieter. Ethan felt a wave of discomfort crawl up his spine. He tried to stay calm. "Do you drive this road a lot?" Carl shook his head. "No." The SUV continued deeper down the dirt path. The forest outside had become so dense that the headlights barely seemed to reach more than a few yards ahead. Then, suddenly, Carl slowed the vehicle. The tires crunched softly as the SUV rolled to a stop. They were in the middle of nowhere. The engine idled quietly. Ethan looked around. There was nothing outside, just darkness. "Why are we stopping?" he asked. Carl didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward Ethan for the first time since they'd left the highway. The expression on his face had changed completely. The friendly smile was gone. His eyes looked cold, studying him, like he was examining something. Then Carl spoke again. "You said you were hiking alone, right?" Ethan's chest tightened. "Yeah." Carl nodded slowly, almost thoughtfully. "That's what I thought." The words hung in the air. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Carl reached toward the center console. Ethan's body instantly tensed, but Carl didn't pull out a weapon. Instead, he grabbed a flashlight. He opened the door and stepped out of the SUV. Cold forest air rushed inside. Ethan watched as Carl walked slowly around to the front of the vehicle. Then he disappeared into the darkness beyond the headlights. For a few seconds, Ethan sat frozen, listening. The forest was completely silent. Then he heard Carl's voice somewhere ahead of the car. "Hey, come here for a second." Ethan didn't move. Carl's voice came again, a little louder. "I want to show you something." Something in Ethan's gut screamed at him not to leave the car. Every instinct told him something was wrong. Very wrong. So instead, Ethan quietly reached for the door handle on the opposite side of the SUV. He opened it as slowly as possible. Then he stepped out. The moment his feet hit the ground, he closed the door softly and began backing away from the vehicle. Carl's flashlight beam swept briefly across the trees ahead. "Hey," Carl called. "You coming?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he turned and ran. Branches whipped against his arms as he sprinted into the woods. Behind him, he suddenly heard Carl shout. Then the sound of footsteps crashing through leaves. For several terrifying seconds, Ethan was certain the man was chasing him, but the forest was thick and uneven. Ethan pushed through bushes, stumbling over roots, running purely on adrenaline. Eventually, the sounds behind him stopped, but he didn't stop running, not for a long time. Nearly 40 minutes later, Ethan finally reached another road, a small county road that eventually led back to the highway. A passing driver picked him up and took him into the nearest town. When Ethan told the local sheriff what had happened, deputies went out to search the forest road he described. They never found the SUV, but about half a mile down that same dirt road, hidden deep in the trees, they did find something else, an old clearing. Inside the clearing were the remains of a campsite. There were burned fire pits, old rope tied around tree trunks, and scattered pieces of clothing, all of them different sizes, different styles, none of them belonging to Ethan. The sheriff later told him something quietly before he left the station. That road Ethan had been taken down. It didn't lead to any trailhead. It didn't connect to any highway. It just ended deep in the forest, and according to the locals, people occasionally went missing somewhere out there. But what disturbed Ethan the most was something he remembered much later. When Carl had stopped the SUV in the middle of the road, the man hadn't seemed surprised by where they were. In fact, he had stopped in that exact spot like he had done it many times before.